get sorted. I am, as I say, going to read The Head by Edith Nesbit. Now, first of all, as I was reading, I was thinking, oh, I can get in a little Yorkshire, that little Yorkshire accent. I've got some accents again. Oh, thank you for the follow on Instagram, Martin Turner. Yeah, and then as I read the character, they're not from Yorkshire. Yeah, 4 rows of 5. Oh, I've performed to less than 19. Don't you worry. Okay. So the way this works, as I say, is I will read. I will not look at the chat. And then we'll talk afterwards. I hope you enjoy tonight's armchair reading. Hear me clearly? It is from the collected supernatural and weird fiction by Edith Nesbit, Volume 2. A story called The Head. If your personal experience is best described by the enumeration of your clothes, your character by the trademark on the gilt waistband of your cigar, and your profession as just anything that comes along, don't you know? You are not exactly the right man in the right place, up to your knees in mud, your carriage with a front wheel off, lying prone in a ditch, several fields off, and your chance of getting to the house where a capricious music hall star has given you an inconvenient rendezvous, less than the least crumb of the biscuit you wish you had put in your pocket before starting. Morris Steele cursed his luck in the grey of the winter's dusk. His driver had left the carriage and gone back with the horses to the inn where he had lunched. His boots were full of water. His high hat seamed and scratched by the lean-fingered trees that stooped here and there over the stone walls. His cigar, long since cold, its end wet and flattened and gnawed, lay foul between his lips. He threw it away. He was lost, beyond doubt, lost on these confounded hills, where every field is just the same as every other field, and the stone walls had no more of individual distinction than the faint blue-grey lines of a copybook. If he had only had the sense to stay where the coachman had left him, or better still at the inn down in the valley where the station was, where there were lights and voices and things to drink. Totty de Vere, the star on whom hung all the hopes of his newest venture, a company for promoting Café Chanson in Manchester, Liverpool and Bolton, had declined to give him any appointment save this. He might call on her between 6 and 7 at Sir Alexander Brisbane's, the grey house with acres of glass, 10 miles from anywhere. He had tried to keep the appointment, tried with unreasonable determination, and there he was. Lights and voices, and things to drink, to eat. Also, for Mr. Deal was not only thirsty, he was hungry as well, and cold and lonely. He thought of the Strand, and the lights of the Strand, lights from restaurants and theatres, where one smelt the French cooking and the patchouli and the regalias. These were to him what to some of us the home pastures and the scents of stocks and Woodstock smoke are. He had waited by the carriage till he had grown certain that all men were alike, and that his driver would, warmed and comforted in the alehouse, not be such a fool as to keep his promise and come back with a trap. He had walked up and down the road for a while, the bleak wind nuzzling in between his neck and the fur collar of his big coat. And then he had started to reach Sir Alexander's on foot, had seen a light and been beguiled by it, what he esteemed a short cut, even if it were not Sir Alexander's light. Any light meant a possible fire, shelter, at any rate, from that too intimate northeaster. He was going now, difficultly, towards the light, across fields and over the eternal sameness of grey walls. Black they seemed in that sombre twilight of cold stars. Beyond the last wall was a little hill brook. He was in it, almost knee-deep, before he guessed at anything worse than the cold, muddy grass of the pastures. The next wall had a gate. He saw the blacker blank and made for it. His fur-lined coat caught on its hasp and ripped loudly. His hat was struck by some silly arch or other above the gate and fell, rolling hollowly on the flags. Mr. Deal exploded passionately. He groped for the hat in the dark dampness, found it, and when he was at the door of the cottage, whose windows all alight had beckoned him from afar, "There must be a wedding or a wake," he said. "Coffee either way." He was casually a journalist when financial enterprises were cold to him. He knocked. He had not been conscious of any movement in the house, but now he was conscious of a cessation of movement and of a silence, as though something inside the house were holding its breath. "Who's there?" The voice came from behind the door, low down, as though the speaker had been trying to look out to the dark through the keyhole. "I've lost my way," said Mr. Deal. "You'll find it, some way or another," said the voice. "I'm very wet and tired. I shall be very grateful for a night's lodging, sir." He added the "sir" because the note of the voice was distinctly feminine, and he saw that the door would open more readily to one whose honesty of purpose was so clear and fine that it could persist, even in the fact of a conviction that there was a man in the house. Mr. Deal's mind, it was not the mind of a fool, pictured a faded woman. Her terror at this late visit, soothed and charmed by the solid compliments it was part of his trade to sow broadcast with both hands on any soil. The harvest, he knew, barely failed. "Oh, have pity," he said, all the pathos of 100 melodramas, reinforcing the earnest pleading of gross physical discomfort. "I am lost on these wild moors. I shall die if you do not assist me. Have pity on me, and heaven will reward you." "You could go back the way you came," said the voice. "I shall die," he said piteously, but very distinctly, as his elocution master had taught him in the days when he meant to be an actor. "I shall die if you turn me away. Oh, my death will be at your door. Oh, save me, for the love of heaven. For the love of heaven," the voice repeated slowly. "For the love—" The rest was lost in the rusty withdrawal of bolts. The door creaked open a brilliant inch. "No one has crossed this door. It's 10 years past," said the voice. "But I can't let a human creature perish by fire or by cold. For the love of heaven, come in." The door was flung back. Within was a little square hall or lobby. Narrow stairs led up in front of Mr. Deal. To the right, a closed door. To the left, the outer door held open. "Go and stand on the stairs," said the thin treble voice, "till I get the door shut." From the stairs, Morris watched to see the door closed by that spare, fluttering woman's form. But it was a man who shut the door and barred it, then turned to the visitor, the cold, calm face of one wholly self-possessed. "Come in," he said. "Since you are here, I'll do what I can for you. Get out of your wet things. I'll go and fetch you change." Deal, alone in the firelit kitchen, threw the wet fur coat across the brown wood settle, loosened his squelching patent leather boots, and heard above him the muffled sound of footsteps on old worm-eaten boards, the creak of old beams, the opening and shutting of drawers and presses. He'd got to bare feet and a costume like that of a Corsican brother in reduced and muddy circumstances when his host returned, an armful of clothing over his arm. "Here," he said in his thin treble, "get into these. It'll be easy. I was a bigger man than ever you'll be." He was now a smaller man, smaller by the stooping shoulder, the narrow chest, the yellow leanness of wrist and neck. By, in a word, age. He was an old man, white-haired and pale. Nothing was young in face or figure, save only the eyes, and they would not have shone amiss in the face of an adventurer of 20. Hot gin and water, the generous half of a Yorkshire pie, one's feet in borrowed large shoes among the grey ashes, whose centre fire had been forced to life by big bellows. Maurice Deal expanded and expanded. He looked better than in his fur coat. He was resolved to stay the night. He pledged his host again and again in the hot, sugary drink, furtively adding strength to the other's glass from the brown demijohn. Whenever the old man left the fire for more wood or to fill the kettle or to bring out his tobacco jar from the disused oven where he stored it to keep it moist, he said, he grew more cordial, and Deal, who was by nature an actor anywhere but on the boards, which paralysed him, set so gay a tune of good fellowship that the other's mind soon danced to it. I'm glad I let you in." "Yes, I'm very glad I broke my vow. You are a good fellow, sir, pardoning the liberty, and this night's the whitest I've known in 10 years. How old would you take me to be now?" The question was awkward. As women of 30 said to subtract passionately to make a total of 27, so men who are gone in their 70s will add to their years and claim your amazed admiration as gaffers of 86. Deal looked hard at the old man. He would have liked to rest his decision on the spinning of a coin. "Not past 60. Struck him as a tactful compromise. The old man laughed, well pleased, as it seemed. "I'm 43, come Lady Day and 7 days beyond," he said. "I was born on All Falls Day 43 years ago and christened April by the same token. Like the fool I am, April Vane's my name, vain by name and vain by nature, they used to say when I was a young man, though you wouldn't think it to look at me now." I, I beg your pardon." Deal had no other counter ready. "Not at all, sir, not at all," the old man rejoined. "It'd be a wonder if you could guess my age. Why, my hair went white, like you see it, in 3 days." "You had some shock, I suppose," said Morris, and he sipped the hot gin. "It's a sad world. Heaven help us." "I don't tell my story to strangers," said the other with shrill, sudden dignity. "I trust," said Deal in his best manner, "that I can sympathise with another man's sorrows without seeking to thrust myself into his confidence." Even as he spoke, he saw how well the old man, the remote house, the air of mystery would serve him in an article for the Daily Bellower, could he but learn the secret of the hermit's grief. He saw the headlines: "An English hermit, tragic story, a broken life." "No," said the other. "No, of course not. You're a gentleman. Anyone could see that, let alone your fur coat." "I've known trouble myself," said the guest. Or the tale, a long tale full of pathetic incidents. A tale whose denouement may have been suggested by the prostrate stump of a cigar against the leg of a table, like that, or something more subtle. "I saw my angel girl," he ended, "at the window of that burning house. How could I save her? I rushed forward. 'Darling,' I'm coming to rescue you.' I plunged among the burning debris and knew no more till I woke in a hospital with a broken heart. And this." He pulled up the sleeve and showed a scar. Got in a drunken fight in Johannesburg. The weapons, whiskey bottles. They cured my face burns, he added, soothing and smoothing his heavy moustache. These hardly show even by daylight. That scar I shall carry to the grave. There was a silence, and then, "Why did you go on living?" asked the other man, his voice tense as the string of a violin. Oh, my poor old mother, the deal, whose mother had died in giving birth to him, her only child. For her sake, don't you know? And my little sister. I went on living, said the other man, and now his voice was no longer like stretched wire, but like a sharp, unyielding blade of a steel poniard. I went on living because there was a silence. Deal could almost hear his heart beat, so sure he was that there was here material for headlines. So keen was he to secure it. He sighed elaborately. "Ah," he said, "it is a relief to tell your troubles to someone who understands." It was quite right to say it. He really sometimes had a wonderful flair for the things to be said and not to say. "Does it really?" asked the man with the young eyes. "Relief, I mean. I've lived here 10 years, and never a word except when I bought the things I needed. Does talking help? Are you sure? Doesn't it open the old wounds wide till the blood squirts out of them? Don't you wish afterward that you'd held your silly tongue? Aren't you ashamed and afraid and sick with yourself for every word that's passed your lips about her?" "No," said Deal, slowly stretching his feet towards the ashes red centre. "No, but then I've never told my story to anyone but you. There's something about you. I don't know what it is. It makes me feel and trust you. So I'm glad I've told you my story, if it's not bored you." The last 5 words were a misdeal, but the other man did not notice it. I don't know. You may be right. Perhaps if I told someone I could trust, my brain and heart would leave off feeling as though they were going to burst and make my clean floor all in a mess. You don't think I'm mad, do you?" It was just what he was thinking. Suddenly, very anxious to be alone with the locked door between him and his host, he said hastily, "No, not at all. But I see I've awakened painful memories with my talk. Will you let me sleep here on the settle, on the floor, anywhere? I don't want a bed. I won't give an ounce of trouble. May I?" "May you what?" "Spend the night," said Deal, and laboriously explaining, added, "Sleep here, you know, in this house." "Of course." "Yes." The answer was very strong, very definite. "You shall sleep here in this house, if you can. But first, I should like to show you the reason why I never sleep in this house. I sleep in the croft when it's warm, and when it's winter in the shippen. But I keep the lights burning all night in every room." "I don't half like this," Horace Deal told himself, and perceived that attractive headlines may be bought too dearly. Aloud he said, "I'm so tired. I could sleep anywhere. I believe I'm almost asleep now. Won't you show me, whatever it is, tomorrow?" "Tomorrow may never come," said the host cheerfully. "I'll go first, just to turn up the lights and then you shall see. He went out, quite quietly and soberly, and Mr. Deal shivered. Now that he was warm and gin-filled, the bleak, windy hillside, the chessboard of those confounded stone walls, seemed a security lightly thrown away. Alone with a lunatic, he mused, in a house 100 miles from anywhere. He fingered a short, broad knife, whose sheath fitted closely against his hip. If the worst comes to the worst, in self-defence, he assured himself. But all the same, I jolly well wish it was jolly well out. Silly lunatic. Come now, said the voice of the silly lunatic, and said it so trustfully, yet so compellingly, that Mr. Deal rose and followed it, half reassured, half curious, and wholly overmastered. It's in the cellar, said the voice. People do pry so. Mr. Deal drew back. He could not help it. You're not afraid of the cellar, said the voice. Besides, it's what we used to call a basement in London. Maurice Deal felt his knife's comforting weight and followed the voice. The stairs were of stone, broad and shallows. There were many of them. The wavering yellow light of the lamp the other man carried showed the stairs neatly yellowed, as the North Country lovingly yellows the stones which make the floors to its homes. The stairs ended in a flagged passage with doors. Outside the right-hand door, the lamp-bearer paused. You told me your story with words, said he, and his language as well as his very intonation had changed. Before he had spoken in colourless accent. Now he spoke in the very key of uneducated London. I never heard so many words, all different, in all my born days. I haven't got no power of jaw like that there. You told me your story, and it's the same as my story. And that is why I'm going to show you my story. 'Cause I can't use my tongue worth tuppence, but my hands I can. And don't be frightened. It ain't real. Mr. Deal reassured himself with a laugh. I'm not so easily frightened, he said. Nor don't you laugh, neither, said the other man with sudden breathless intensity. I couldn't answer for myself what I should do if you was too laughing. It's the work of my hands, and I love the work of my hands, same as Almighty God did. Don't you go to laughing there, sir, or it'll be the worse. Both of us. Oh, you wouldn't. His voice grew suddenly tender. Ain't you showed me your art? Put it into my hand and look at. Don't I know you? The dramatic instinct taught Mr. Deal to hold out his hand in the dim lamplight and press the other man's, with a fine show of manly emotion. If I was a stonemason by trade, said the host, appreciated. In the King's Road, Chelsea, I was, yeah. That's how I got the hang of it. Mr. Deal had a sudden swift vision of an elaborate monument erected in the cellar over the body of the victim of homicidal mania. Now, said the other, and flung open the door. Mr. Deal had prepared for a shock of some kind, but he was not prepared for the shock he got. The open door disclosed a village street, lit, warm and red. A village street at night. It was the village where the inn was, that he had wished he'd stayed at, where the lights were, and the voices and the drinks. There, by the same token, was the inn, its sign emblazoned with the arms of the local landowner, lit redly by the flames of conflagration. There was the square church tower, flushed against the dark sky, the tombstones in the raised churchyard gleaming rosy beneath the yew shadows. There was a crowd in the street, men with pails and cans of water. This side of the inn, half the street was in flames. From the window of the burning house, a girl, leaned out below a man holding a ladder, was in the act of plunging against the window. At his feet lay a body, a dead man, as it seemed, but not dead by burning. Blood showed at mouth and nose. The whole thing was worked out with wax and wood and paint and paper and a dozen old yet adequate materials at much less than half life, but so perfect with the perspective and the proportion that scene had appeared to a spectator halfway up the village street, just as, and not otherwise than it now appeared to the spectator at the cellar door, the peculiar and desperate terror, the mad splendid heroism that fire engenders. These were here visible to the onlooker. Splendid! Ripping! The word sprang to Mr. Deal's lips and stayed there. The other man was speaking in a low, thin, untroubled voice. That's me, he said, with the ladder. That dog in the gutter. That's him she threw me over for. He was my mate too, one time. She was Mrs. Dog. That was to have been Mrs. April Vane. But I loved her. That's her, leaning out the bedroom window. When the fire broke out, where was he? In heaven, where he got the right to be by the marriage lines, not him. He was in the public, silly drunk. When I came along, he was crying there in front of the house, where she was a-burning, crying and shivering and saying, "Oh, I shall be burnt. I know I shall." And she was screaming, "For God's sake, save the child." What did you do? Mr. Deal's voice was tactfully attuned. I knocked him down, of course. Thought I'd lulled him. Wish I had. Then when I got the ladder and set it up against the windows, I was 3/4 up it when the window frame went smash, burned from underneath. I never seed him again. He went to London, I've heard say. But I've made his face, and you go in and look, you'll see the man I wish I'd swung for. If he'd been where he ought to be. But he'd left her all alone, her and the kid. That wasn't 3 days old. Again, Morris wrung his hand. The vision of attractive headlines had faded, grown dim, vanished in the red glow of the burning village. He walked gingerly into the picture and looked closely at the wax puppets, perfect in every detail. Each little effigy was in itself a finer work of art even than the tableau which included them all. It's beautiful, said Morris Deal. I never saw anything like it. Taken me my life to make it, said its maker. But why did you make it so small? Why not life-size? There'd have been room for part of it anyway. Money, came sharply the reply. I've only got the house and the croft and £30 a year. Came too late for me to marry her. The whole thing's a marvel. You ought to have been a sculptor with a proper studio and all that, said the guest. I ought to have been a married man. Kids of my own, said the host. Wouldn't you like to make them life-size? Morris Deal asked gently. I'm putting every week away something for that very thing. I could advance you the money, said the man, who took his living where he found it. No. I won't be beholden to nobody. The tone was decisive. You needn't be beholden. Come to London. I'll find you a fine big room, twice the size of this. You shall make the things life-size, the best materials money can buy. We'll charge £1 a head to come in and see it. You'll pay me back in no time and make your fortune besides. I don't want to make my fortune, said the old man, staring with his young eyes at the blazing village street. I want to get alongside of him. Well, Mr. Deal, you're much more likely to do that in London than here, you know. Suppose he saw the outside of our show, having been in the fire himself. It's 1,000,000 to 1 he'd turn in to have a look, and you could tell him what you thought of him. You think he would? Do you? Certain of it, said Mr. Deal, who thought nothing less likely. Then I'll do it. All life-size. Life-size! You could have men to help you. Not with the faces. The houses, that I don't say. Not the faces. Of course not. Of course not the faces. Mr. Deal assented cordially. Let's come back to the fire and talk it over, and tomorrow we'll get this agreement signed, and Totty DeVere can go to the deuce. This is the big thing we're in now. Eh? The other party to the agreement queried. He had not. All his senses were deep plunged in the joy of his masterpiece. He sighed at last and spoke. There ought to be noise, he said. That's the worst thing about a fire. When it's taking hold, it's as quiet as a mouse. When it's got hold, it roars like a lion and screams like a woman. We'll make it scream and roar. This thing's got to go, and it will go, said Maurice Deal. And it did go. The whole picture. The graduated houses, the little figures of wood and wax and paper, the ingenious lanterns that lighted the tinsel flames that gleamed, all was taken to London and set up in the big attic in Fitzroy Street. Mr. Deal brought men to see it, men with shiny hats and fur coats and cigars like his own. And when they'd seen that, they went away and drank brandy and soda at marble-top tables where Maurice Deal talked, and they came into it with him, as he had known they would. April Vane was shy and moody at first, would have no help. But when he saw the life-size body produced by a trained workman for one of his own little models, he drew a long breath. They go ahead, he said. I'll have more time for the faces. It cost the enterprising Mr. Deal a great deal of patience and his enterprising friends a great deal of money. The big fight was over the subject of the tableau. Vane wanted to reproduce the village scene exactly as it had been burnt into his mind. Deal wanted the great fire of London, with the old London Bridge and the heads of the traitors above the gate. But though Vane had been the other man's slave since that night, he had thought that he had seen the other man's heart. He was obstinate, till Deal said more people will come to the great fire of London than just a village fire. You'll get more chance of seeing him. Benveilne yielded. No expense was spared. The best scene painters and carpenters that the syndicate could buy for money were bought. An eminent archaeologist was feed to advise. And an expert in acoustics solved the problem of the roar of the fire triumphant. The thing was boomed a month in advance by all the venal press. A big room in the West End that had failed as an art gallery was hired. For this, that should not fail. Vane was often wearied, often disheartened. I like the other best, he said. That was mine. This will be everybody's. Wait till you see the real thing all put together, Deal urged continually. He was very gentle and patient. It was important to him to keep the old man's adoration alive. That will be yours, and you'll never be able to leave it. You mark my words. The old man marked him, and they came true. The thing caught on. Have you seen the Great Fire of London? People asked each other between dances and during dinners, in the train, on tops of omnibuses, like Madame Tussauds. Oh, no, not the least. It's absolutely thrilling. As to the first moment, you can hardly believe it's not real. You must go. And everybody went. It was not like Madame Tussauds or like any waxwork show that ever was before. To the making of Madame Tussauds go perhaps talent. To the making of Musée Gravin, certainly genius. But to the making of this went the heart and soul of a man. And from the first moment, when he saw the completed picture, perfect from the life-size figures in the foreground to the little paper figures in the far distance, he gave himself up to it. As to his real life, the interludes, when he showed it to visitors, mechanically warned them not to pass its low barrier, explained it in a monologue learned by heart. These were dull dreams. The real moments were those when he was alone, could overstep the barriers, clap the hurrying soldier on the back, whisper encouragement to the old woman, hastening away in her son's strong arm, calling shrilly by name these images of dead citizens who had been alive and furious in the flight under the horror of that great blaze. For to him they were not strangers. Out of the time of the second Charles, each wore the face of some man or woman in the Derbyshire village. But to his own effigy he never spoke, nor to the woman whose face looked out of the burning window, nor to the corpse that lay at the feet of the ladder-bearer, for now there was no room for doubt that it was the figure of a corpse. That change had made without consulting Mr. Deal and the syndicate. Its mouth was bloody. It had been the mouth of the little effigy in the Derbyshire cellar, and the mouth of the man whom he had struck down long ago under the eyes of the deserted wife. Only now the throat, too, was bloody. Oh, let him alone, said Mr. Deal, when one of the syndicate remarked, by Jove, It was just a bit too ghastly. It pleases him, and you can't lay the horror too thick for the VP. April Vane slept at his lodgings, but he did nothing else there. Not that every night. Sometimes he slept in the gallery, on one of the red velvet seats, and always he ate and drank there, talking to the figures whenever he was alone with them. "They're company for me," he said when Deal tried remonstrance, and Deal noted curiously that the life-size figures did not hold for their maker the horror that in the first little figures had driven him to sleep in barn or croft, anywhere but in this house where they were. But it was in August, when the crowd had worn thin, that Vane stayed away for one day. "I've seen him," told Deal, standing by his bedside very early. He had told the hotel people that it was a matter of life and death. "I must have a day off. I must try to find him." "But who's to run the show?" asked Deal in his blue silk pyjamas and blue jowl. "I must have a day off," said Vane. "I don't want to worry you, but I must have a day off. Shut the show up, or run it yourself." The show was that day run by Mr. Deal. The takings were 2 bags of silver only that day. That day the head was stolen. It was the head of the corpse, broken off sharp at the neck, where the blood began. It was stolen, and the careless silk-hatted custodian knew no more than you and I who had done it. Vane had not found the man he sought, but when he found out that theft, he forgot the fruitless search. His grief was like that of a mother who loses her child, a woman who loses her lover. "Well, it's all right," Theo told him again. "Throw the corner of the mantle up so that it'll never show, or leave it as it is. It's a pretty average ghastly like that." It was, but "I want his face," Vane said again and again. "Well, then, for goodness sake, make his face." Deal was losing patience a little at last. "Make his face again and have done with it." And he lit one of his eternal cigars. "You could do it at home in the evenings." "I can't do it," said Vane very low. "I've been trying. I can't see his face." "You sleep on it," said Mr. Deal cheerfully. "I'll come back to you all right in the morning. Besides, you've got the little model." "I cut the face off of that," said Vane gently. "I cut it off with a little bit of time to see if it would bleed. I can't remember his face." "Oh, that must have been stolen for a lark. Look here, I'll advertise for it, and we'll get it back all right." "Yes," said Vane with trembling eagerness. "Get it back. I must see his face." He saw it the next day, on the shoulders of a living man, a tall, thick-set man with dirty hands and ready-made suit, who knocked at the gallery door just as it had been closed. The same face, but not the same expression. "You're advertising for a head," said the man. "Yes," said Vane. "Come in." Shut the door on the two of them. "I ain't going to name no names, but a pal of mine came in here day before yesterday in one of your blessed dolls and got my pal's face. So he pinched it." "Why?" Vane softly asked. "Well, if a man ain't got a right to his own chump, what has he got to? And he'll let you have it back, but not for the 5 he offers." "I'll take it. If you offers 5, he'll give 20. Say the word, and I'll put it down in writing to prevent mistakes, and I'll guarantee you shall have the head." "Yes," said Vane. "I shall have the head." He advanced on the other man, and now for the first time his own face showed plainly. "Heavens!" The man retreated, his hands held out to keep off something, and now he looked like the head that he had stolen. "Great heavens! It's April Vane!" "You had better say your prayers. It is April Vane," April Vane said, and came at him. It must have been a couple of days later that Deal strolled in at closing time with that member of the syndicate who had felt so squeamish about the cutthroat. The lights were low. There was no blaze to illuminate the picture, and the machine was silent as in the day roared and screamed in the very voice of fire. So you got the head all right? You remembered? I told you you would, said Mr. Deal, glancing at the corpse. Yes, said old April. I got the head. I remembered. Mr. Deal went into the enclosure, and the cinders crunched under his boots. By Jove, you are an artist, Vane. I say, Montague, look at this corpse. The thing you don't like. Why, it's the best of the lot. You've improved it, Vane. Oh, ain't old chap. It's just the old expression, but by George, it's more lifelike than ever was. What is it? Something in the lie of the body, I suppose. It's just like life, isn't it now, Monty? It's more like death, said Montague. I don't like it. It's stuffy in here, and the place is as quiet as a churchyard. Come along out. You're a schoolgirl, Montague. A silly schoolgirl. I believed you were frightened of the thing. Mr. Deal kicked it contemptuously and without violence. Good night, Vane. Why don't you go to one of the halls and have a gay evening? I'll stand treat. You are very kind. Always kind, said Vane gratefully. But all the evenings will be gay now. Got the head. I have remembered. The two members of the Great Fire Syndicate went out into the light of Regent Street. Oh, said Montague, that place gives me the horrors. It jolly well meant to, said Deal, handing out his cigar case. That corpse. It's not canny, said Montague, and he laughed, not quite easily. Why, it makes me fancy. I say, what's that on your boot? Heavens, man, it's blood, as a chap says in the story. Don't talk rot, said Deal. He did not see that his right foot had stained the pavement. Montague stooped. But it is blood, he said. The Head by Edith Nesbit. Well, there you go. Thank you very much. Those of you that stuck with that, I really enjoyed that story. I did. I think she's brilliant. Twisted. Thank you. Good. It was a great story. When I read it, it's willfully ridiculous in places. Absolutely, in the writing. You tell me what you think. I'm aware of the time. Come on, do we all stan Edith Nesbit, or did that not do it for you? I'm fine either way. You tell me. April Vane was a little bit of an odd one. What makes you think that? I'll tell you what I think. But whilst you're typing what you think, I'll tell you what I think. I had a bit of a spoiler when I read the story. I usually kind of like count the pages, roughly estimate what I can do in the time. And when I counted the pages, I saw the last line, because the last line stands out in the story. And I thought it was a real shame, because when I was reading the story, I couldn't tell where it was going. I knew where it was ultimately going. It didn't give too much away, but I couldn't tell. Was it a ghost story? Was it a murder story? Was it a haunted house? What was in the basement? Was it Edgar Allan Poe? And actually, I found it really funny. It was a funny story as well. These characters are grandiose and ridiculous, and I love Deal. Yeah, Maurice Deal. This chancer, the actor who wouldn't act, and I just loved how it zigzagged, how the story didn't go in the way that I thought. And then, of course, it ends up ultimately brutal and horrible and madness, and everything we suspected is true. But it wasn't what I expected at all. I also loved how it's of its time. I haven't done my research as to when it was written. I need to do that. I'm going to do that now. So it will. Edith Nesbit, the head. Let's see what it says. It's on Audible. When was it written? 1886. Now, a previous story I've read of hers, Man Size in Marble, was in the same collection. Now, that to me is why I love Edith Nesbit. The convoluted path to get him to his revenge with a chance encounter at the door. Yes, I love that. This is why I love Edith Nesbit, because it's so contemporary. She's writing about a London she probably knew a little bit of. She mentions that failed art galleries, the pompous events, that Madame Tussauds and some other important thing, and then she paints this picture of a kind of London. I think I love how I love Edith Nesbit, but also I love the clarity of it. It wasn't too florid. She married the skipper of the Woolwich ferry. Yeah, good on her. Just after it set up the Fabians, wasn't she? And she was doing a bit for keeping in with the working classes. I love the clarity of her descriptions. I love the social mores. I love the fact that, as I say, Maurice Deal is a ridiculous character. And we're supposed to love him a little bit, I think. But we know the fact that he's going off to get some singer to sing in this new idea, which is in the clubs of singing clubs of Liverpool, Manchester, and Bolton. I love that he wears fur coats and bigger cigars. We know the kind how he would have looked. Top hat, Victorian gentleman chewing on his cigar, carrying his coins. Brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. What did you think? Not about my love of Edith Nesbit. What did you think of the story? Thank you, Van Halen. Thank you. Yeah, there's a couple of things in there I didn't get the reference to. I might look them up now. Juggling things tonight. Look at that. Here's me confidently opening a book. Like I can read it. Just Musée Grevin. Somebody Google. Can somebody Google Madame Tussauds, please? Madame Tussauds opening times. Somebody Google that for 18. I knew Barry would be there. 1835. Yeah, really descriptive images. I think there's a real deceptive simplicity to her descriptive work. Musée Grevin. What was that? Grevin Museum in Paris. A wax museum. There you go. A wax museum which was opened in 1882. So this is only a couple of years after. A couple of years before this was written. And Madame Tussauds is a bit older. I love the sentence. A brilliant inch. Yes. A brilliant inch. Dermatological Wax Museum of the Hospital Saint Louis. Don't want to see that. I don't want to see wax of people's skin. Nope. No, thank you. No. No. I love the feeling of the time as a setting. Yes, I did too. There's a bit of time travel, very atmospheric taste of old London. But but also it was old London, but to me, contemporary London. An entrepreneur putting something on that's going to catch everybody and squeeze them for a coin and be the big hit of the summer, burn out and fade away, make the money back. It's just as it ever was. Plus ça change. I have to ration my Edith Nesbit stories. I could do one every week if I wanted to. And I want to. But what a discovery for me. What a discovery for me. Just, that wanting to avoid just the curates, the ghostwriting curates to find these curiosities. The age guessing bit was funny, yes, absolutely. It was funny, and it was. I think what I think it was an intentionally funny story. There was a sense of the ridiculous as well as the macabre and the brutal. I think there was a sense of the threat and then the reveal. You could, if it was a film, which I'd see. I think I see. Was that milky coffee? No, that was a homebrew. That was a homebrew, an IPA, cloudy IPA. There was that ridiculousn's of it all, that kind of like coming down in the candles to open the door, the reveal, and then the reveal is like, and then you've got Morris who's gone from I'm gonna die to I'm gonna make a lot of money. Oh yeah, and that was that I really enjoyed. I wonder what the first scary story that involved going into the cellar. It could have been Bluebeard. Remember when I read you Bluebeard? That's a medieval fairy tale. Or it could actually, I would hasten to suggest, Theseus and the Minotaur. It's probably got pretty ancient, terrifying cellar claim, doesn't it? There we go. Look, last few comments. What happens here is we officially close because it's a late night. It's Monday. We're all very tired. And if anybody wants to stick around, real natter afterwards, you're welcome to. But thank you very much. I could tell you that my version of the story of Theseus and the Minotaur sometime. I think it's out there actually. I think it's out there. I did a live version for children at one point. There's a really interesting on Start the Week this morning was about the mother of the Minotaur. Can't remember her name now. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I can recommend Start the Week on Radio 4, 9 o'clock on BBC Sound. That was good. As I was getting myself ready to go this morning. Yes. What are you reading? Very quickly. What are you reading? And then I want to tell you about tomorrow night. And then we'll finish. And then if anyone wants to stick around, I'll stick around with you. If we're all tired, that's well. Scariest cellar one is The Silence of the Lambs. Yeah. Yeah, that is horrible. I mean, I suppose it could be, down the well, down the hobbit holes, down the boggart holes, down the oubliettes. Always something in the dark, something where you can't see around the corner, isn't it? But yeah, Silence of the Lambs is particularly horrible. Yeah. Never quite got in the film, and I love the film. I read the book. So I loved probably one of like 20 people who went to see Red Dragon, Manhunter, Michael Mann version, which predates. So it's Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter, because Michael Mann, and I always preferred that to when she goes to see Hannibal Lecter, Anthony Hopkins, which is amazing. Didn't get the stone and the glass. Too medieval for me. Whereas when you go to see Brian Cox's Hannibal Lecter, it was white and clinical and cold. Oh, I like that. David Sedaris. Oh, I love him. Love him. And Bob Mortimer, of course. Yeah, the Primal Fear. Primal Fear of Dark King.